Good afternoon and welcome to Whitebox, Loisaida, or Loisaida, refer to ourselves. But this is the first project in a program called New York Artscapes, where we're going to continue taking the pulse of immigrant communities. So without further ado, Yohanna M Roa, curator, will introduce everybody.
Yes, including Jorge and Esperanza. Hello, everybody. Firstly, I would like to say thanks to Juan, because we have worked on this project probably for 2 years since we met. You met with Marcos. That was 2 years ago in Harlem, and he said something about a workshop of the New Yorker, and oh my God, what's that? Then at that moment, and probably I already mentioned you, I remember something that happened 10 years ago when I bought a book about Art Workers Coalition in Mexico City, and I was quite interested in that book because I focused in archival practices. So in a phrase, somewhere in the preface, they say some Latin Americans were involved in the movement. And I was like, oh my God, a phrase to say that, there were Latin Americans working there. Then I had something like a dream, thinking, oh my God, I would like to develop a project with that. And what they meet, and we talked about that topic, I was really excited. And thanks, Marcos, for sharing with me the material, your stories, your art too at the same time. Has been a very exciting process, and I'm saying in a professional and personal way. So thank you so much. I would like to say thank you to the artists, Esperanza Cortez, Lori Horowitz, Lira Puerta, Ellen Al, Yolanda Vasquez, that some people, including Ricky, that is today with us, they say that the woman that is in the front window looks like Adela, one of the New Yorker person famous in the neighborhood. So that's amazing. Probably, is that woman. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna tell them that. Okay. So thanks to the speakers. Thank you, Stephen, Marco. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you so much, Yasim. I will read about your bio a little bit in a while. But thank you, because you have been working with the Taller Boricua Latin American community. Thank you to Jorge Lozano. He's online with us. He's traveling tomorrow to Cuba, so now he's in a row. So thank you to do that. And with Esperanza, a beautiful human being and magnificent artist. So thank you. I would like to read something too short. Then I'm gonna introduce you the first speaker, that is Marcos. So the Taller Boricua early on had the vision of developing programs that revolved around the reclaiming of Puerto Rican roots, including the rescue of the Taino past, process of social and educational resistance in schools and public space in East Harlem, linking with the young lords, support for families of young people killed by the police, and dissemination of New Yorker cultural production. I would like to say more things, but I believe that we should start. So I'm gonna read a short bio of our speaker. It's a really short bio because they are powerful people who have had great paths in their life. So Marcos Dimas was involved in the Art Workers Coalition during the late 60s, and then he co-founded the Taller Boricuas, an artistic collective. In 1970, he decided to forsake his early training in modern art to begin a quest for alternative source. This led him to embrace the art of extinct Taino Indian peoples in his homeland, Puerto Rico. He also studied filmmaking at the School of Visual Arts and later in the WNEG Film Television School. Thank you to be today, Marcos. Please.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. Where do you want me to start?
Oh my God.
Beginning.
Anyway, before we go on, that print out there is by Yolanda Velázquez, and that is an image of Belkis Ayllón. a Cuban printmaker. Okay, anyway, just to get that straight. That's Doña Sayón. Not Doña, what's her name?
Doña Lela. That has been an issue because during the process, to get the documents and find the information, and it's curious because this is probably the third archive that I'm working on. That's the thing that always is happening, the memories and ideas that a person like you can have and tell to the people. Sometimes there is something broke in between in the documents and the oral history. When I saw that piece, that was the last piece that we brought to the exhibition. Actually, it wasn't included in this show. Because you brought through the whole material that there was piece, because I saw it in the workshop and I was like, that was behind of a desk, and I said, what's that? Oh, it's a piece. The author is I don't remember, but I will send you the information. And it's good to have the name now. Thank you.
Yolanda Velasquez, yeah, she's
It's a very powerful piece. It's a powerful, very powerful.
Very powerful piece.
Yes.
That's a woodcut.
Yes.
Print.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my story begins when I come back from the Army back in 1964 or 65, and I try to get into a Fashion Institute of Technology. And because I had studied printmaking and pattern making, I was going to be a tailor. But I wasn't accepted, so the next thing I did was, well, let's go to art school. So I went to School of Visual Arts. I joined the School of Visual Arts about 1968. While at the School of Visual Arts, I meet a bunch of artists who became my cohorts, and we joined the Art Workers Coalition. At the Art Workers Coalition, we meet Rafael Ortiz Montañez, who is the author of the concept of the Museo del Barrio. And his concept was to have a museum where the art would be taken out to the streets and do away with the hierarchy of the museums. And so we put that into practice also. When we created the Taller Boricua, we would have traveling exhibitions. That movie that you see there before, that was a traveling exhibition that we would pack a van with art and we take it out to different locations, set up in schoolyards, parks, festivals, wherever. And that was a form of bringing art to the people, So I joined the Art Workers Coalition, where I meet Rafael Ortiz Montañez, and I meet Tom Lloyd, and I meet Faith Ringel. And there we are part of the Art Workers Coalition. And we started doing demonstrations with them. There's a photo, a bunch of photos over there on that wall that I took at one of the first protests that I participated in. We did a protest against the Museum of Modern Art because they were showing an exhibition of the Surrealist movement. And we felt that they were co-opting the Surrealist movement, which was actually anti-war movement. And we were an anti-war movement. So we said we have to protest that exhibition. And we did. And within the art workers, there was a group of Puerto Rican artists, which would say the Latin group. There was a group of black artists, Afro-American artists, and then there was a group of general artists, mostly white artists. And so, some of the issues involved us, but we also had personal issues that we had to deal with. We had to deal with the non-representation of Puerto Rican and black art in the major institutions. So we took that as one of our mantras, and we protested against the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum, and various other institutions. While we we went and took over Thomas Hoven's office, demanding that there be representation. We demanded that they decentralize their holdings and spread the culture out to the different communities. That was our mantra. We want community art centers. So Thomas Hoven decided to talk to, I forgot his name, I got it written down here, Donald Harper, who was the director of the New York State Council on the Arts. And we met with Donald Harper and we said, listen, we want funding for community art centers. And Donald Harper said, well, you have to prove it to us that you want that's a necessity, you know. So we managed to get a grant from the State Council on the Arts, and we created what was called a Community Artist Cultural Survey, which all of us, all the Puerto Ricans and all the blacks, got a little tape recorder and some notebooks, and we were to go out into the communities and get people to talk, you know, to give us the whys of why we should have community art centers and all that. And during that time, there was a big drug epidemic, and everybody wanted their kids to be somewhere else except the streets, you know. So everybody went along with that. We went back to the State Council of the Arts and presented the findings, and then they created what they called the Ghetto Arts Program. You know, back then, you know,
They actually called it
the Ghetto Arts Program. Yeah, the Ghetto Arts Program, which eventually became the Special Arts Program. You know, so that was part of the beginnings of our involvement with the art workers and with the arts community. The arts workers community, I mean the Art Workers Coalition, was also instrumental in getting a free day at the museums, you know. There were a few other things that we were able to acquire. So after that, the Kent State Massacre. In honor of the Kent State Massacre, we will have a day without art. And that day, the art workers decided that we're going to close all the museums. So factions of different art workers went and protested against and tried to close the museums, the Metropolitan, the MoMA, etc., all throughout the Brooklyn Museum. The Bronx Museum wasn't there yet. The Bronx Museum was just an idea at that time. You know, it was like a program that was in the courthouse on 163rd Street. So it wasn't a museum yet, a real museum. So we went out. We decided to go and protest in front of the Museum of the City of New York, which was in East Harlem. So that's in our neighborhood. Let's go over there. You know, we went over there. We closed it down. Eventually, what came out of these things is the Museum of the City of New York hired a woman called Betty Mango to be the liaison between the museum and the community. The Metropolitan Museum hired, what was his name? Oh my God. Anyway, they hired a Puerto Rican to be the liaison between the museum and the community, and that was the beginning of the museum starting to relate to the communities, the actual communities. You know, eventually the Metropolitan created an exhibition which was, I think, the history of Puerto Rican art or something like that. Our heritage of Puerto Rico, right. The art heritage of Puerto Rico came out of that initiative, the initiative things that we were doing. The Museum of the City of New York created programs also to deal with art and education. And by them creating, by the State Council of the Arts creating the Ghetto Arts Program, the Taller Boricua, Puerto Rican Workshop, was able to get its first grant of $5,000. You know, so yeah, so and we started a program where we bought a van, and we load the van up with art, and we would take it, drive it around to different locations. We set up outdoor exhibitions. We would take art to the community. Instead of having the community go to the museums, we would take art. At the same time, we use it as an educational vehicle. We would set up our posters like this on the wall, and then we start talking about the history, about the art, about the techniques that we use. That's when we got people interested. We would set up tables outside and do outside workshops on printmaking, linoleum cut and whatnot, you know? So those were the beginnings. Those were the beginnings. We also allied with the African American artists and protested against the exhibition called Harlem on My Mind that the Metropolitan Museum had. The Afro-American artists felt that there were a lot of pretty pictures, but it didn't say anything about the reality of Harlem anymore. There was a lot of artists like Faye Ringgold and Tom Lloyd, who were, and Betty Andrews, who were practicing artists. And they wanted to be heard. They wanted to exhibit their art in the institutions. But the institutions didn't want the art being exhibited. Out of that initiative, the Studio Museum was born. The Studio Museum was born on 125th Street and Fifth Avenue, on the second floor loft. That's why it was called the Studio Museum. But it was a studio for artists initially. There was Mola, there was Benny Andrews, there were a lot of Afro-American artists who were using the spaces there, you know? So those are some of the beginnings that fermented along with the Puerto Rican Workshop and other organizations that started to spring up also, like here in the Loisaida, Charas was here, and there was, and then 4 years after that, the New Rican Poets Cafe comes into play, you know, and they're still around, yeah. And we're still around. We've been around 54 years now. We organized the workshop in 1969 and incorporated in 1970. Is that enough, or you want me to keep going?
You know, I have comment and question. I believe that, you know, I'm not the only one, but I believe that I'm gonna give the word to Yasim Ramirez, and at the end we can, you know, put a conversation.
The only thing I want to mention is the blood dollar. We created the blood dollar, and we will give it out in demonstration. The blood dollar says not valid for Puerto Rican, black artists, and female artists. You know, and that was very important back then, because even the women weren't accepted in the Met or the Museum of Modern Art. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, it's not too different now. It's not too different now. You know, probably the average of women and, you know, black people increase a little bit, but not too much. You know, but well, okay.
May I say something for the records and for everybody watching us on Facebook? This is made possible, this talk and this exhibition, by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and by NISCA, who has given us a small grant to do the administration of such things. So thank you to the.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Yasim Ramirez is an art worker, curator, and narrator based in New York City. She holds a Ph.D. in art history from the Graduate Center CUNY Born in Brooklyn, Ramirez was active in the downtown art scene of the early 80s. As a cool kid and art critic for the East Village age. Attracted to the street and hip hop, she became acquainted with the emerging artists and writers, many of whom are now icons in the 80s. Currently an independent curator, Ramirez has elaborated on curatorial projects with the Bronx Museum, El Museo del Barrio, the Loisaida Center, the New Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Franklin Furnace, and Taller Boricua. It's a short video. Thank you so much.
It's so wonderful. Hi. Buenas tardes, everybody.
Speak up, please.
See you guys.
Jasmine, speak up.
Speak up?
Yep.
Okay. I'm sorry. I am a little hoarse because of my allergies. So, what I have to say, number one, is it's been an honor, a true honor in my life to work at Taller Boricua. It changed my life. I was born like in the movement, in the Puerto Rican movement. So my first mentor actually was Gino Rodriguez of the Alternative Museum. And that was in like 1977, and it was such a different time then. I always tell my students, you know, these organizations are crucial for a person like me, because I didn't come from money. Like today, if you try to go to a place and try and work as an intern, they want to make sure that you have, like, are you from Yale or Columbia? I mean, you know, it's very elitist again today. But at that time, New York, because of people like Marcos, because of Taller, was really dedicated to social justice and cultural equity for all. This was genuine, and I saw it for myself through the archives, but also through the practice. The reason I can call myself an art worker, even though I wasn't obviously in the Art Workers Coalition, is because of what I learned day to day with Marcos and Nitza and Fernando Salicru, who are my three mentors at Taller, and you couldn't have anyone better, right? Because we do everything there, right? I got to learn how to remember, Marcos. You make me like put up the paintings. You know, you taught me how to hang stuff, because usually in a museum, you know, curators, you actually cannot touch the work, right? You have to have installers. It's very, very different. Yeah, and as a result of this, I mean, I dedicated my dissertation. I wrote the first dissertation on the Puerto Rican art movement in New York, and it was because of the graciousness of Marcos and Nitza and so many artists that gave me time, because it's an oral history. You know, I'm still trying to make it into a book. And the other thing that I want to just mention briefly is why don't more people know about that in relationship to, for example, the Chicano movement or the Puerto Rican movement? And one is numbers, but the other thing that has struck me throughout is Marcos, the first show that Marcos did was at the Brooklyn Museum, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Right, so there was, in 1969, that was an incredible year. I started the Puerto Rican art movement in 1969, because in January of 1969, you had the Harlem on My Mind exhibition open, which was protested. You had the creation of the Art Workers Coalition, right? At MoMA, which began really as an artist's rights, because one of the artists took his piece out of the show because he didn't like the way it was exhibited.
Takis.
Takis, that's right. Takis. That's how the Art Workers Coalition, you know, comes into being. And then the third, which is often not discussed, is that the Brooklyn Museum holds the first exhibition of what today we would call emerging Puerto Rican artists. And that was an African American curator who was a community. He was hired as a community liaison, the community curator, and it was his idea to do a show about Puerto Rican artists, because he said he had never met one. I mean, imagine, right? He said, you know, no one knows about Puerto Rican artists. Who are they? And the brilliant thing that he did, because he was trained from the Harlem Renaissance, because I mean, I have a whole thing about the Harlem Renaissance, the kind of training that young people received. It was incredible training. His vision, was that he didn't go for it. He wasn't interested in going. For example, he could have gone to the Puerto Rico and gotten things from there, right? He could have gone to the department, the Puerto Rican government, and had an office here. But no, he says that he was interested in encouraging young artists. He wanted to see the new generation, and this is how it comes into being. So one of the things that's become difficult for me as an art historian to sell is this notion of success. Because Marcos's first show, the Puerto Ricans began at the Brooklyn Museum, right? But then they decide to stay in El Barrio. And that kind of commitment is something that younger people really don't recognize anymore. They're like, so you started in a museum and then you stayed in El Barrio. I mean, usually the trajectory, the success that we are taught, a successful artist goes from grassroots to a museum to collectors, right? I mean, where is that whole infrastructure, right, was not created specifically because these artists believed in art for the people, and it has had some consequences as an art historian. So I really had to rethink, what are these contributions? The first and most important aesthetically is that they brought the Afro-Taino aesthetic to New York. I mean, this is an incredible thing. People didn't know about the Tainos. That wasn't taught. So I mean, that in itself is aesthetic. I mean, in terms of something else, it's like these guys were doing social practice art way, way before, right? It's become funded today, but these are the original social practice artists. The history of Puerto Rico, carrying on the tradition of the young lords and what was going on there and educating the community. And in fact, once the young lords disbanded, a lot of them went into these cultural institutions, and it's through culture that this revolutionary spirit continues and is taught to us. I have pictures in my mind now of what that revolution is because they made it possible. So that's what I have to, that's where I want to end it. But in terms of legacy, Taller is the, origins of the Nuyorican movement in New York. You cannot talk about Nuyorican movement without Taller Boricua. And I'm hoping that, one day, I've written several extensive articles, but we're working on the book. And right now, Arlene Davila and I, for example, we're coming up with co-editing an anthology on the Nuyorican movement that's going to be published by Duke. So, we'll look out for that.
That's great.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I believe that you are pointing out relevant things about the issues to work in the grass of the neighborhood. So that's quite relevant. In the first wall of this exhibition on that corner, I decided to install 4 documents. The first one is in 1969, the first year. I found a second document of 1979. Then 3 years after that in 89, and the last one in 99. And you can see the process every 3 years, relevant exhibition, reviews in magazines, in newspaper, for relevant people. So when I found that information, it's not 1 year, 4 years in documents. So it's such a wonderful thing, really, that you are, addressing. Okay, today Esperanza Cortez is with us. Esperanza is a New York-based multidisciplinary contemporary artist who creates installation which incorporates sculptures, drawings, prints, painting, and video. Cortez has exhibited extensively in the United States in a solo and group exhibition in venues including Bronx Museum, Queens Museum of Art, El Museo del Barrio, MoMA PS1, Socrates Sculpture Park, and Taller Boricua Gallery in New York. Nationally, Cortez has shown at the Cleveland Art Museum, Cleveland, Ohio, Helen Day Art Center, BT, and the Lorenzo Homer Gallery, Philadelphia. Esperanza has been linked as an artist at various times in the Puerto Rican workshop. Hello, Esperanza, and thanks to be with us today.
Hi, everybody. So my history with Taller Boricua begins in 1992. I had been artist in residence at El Museo del Barrio, and I found out about the Taller Boricua. So I applied for a show. I sent them my slides, which is what you did at that time. And they accepted my work, and I had a show. But before that, I have to say that I was born in Colombia and raised in the United States. And like Yasim, I have a very similar background, coming from immigrants who struggled to make a place in this country, no privilege. And I found that Puerto Ricans were so much more open to hearing my opinion, looking at my work, exhibiting my work than, pretty much anyone. And also the fact that I was a young single mother, that did not play in the art world. People just would not recognize me as an artist. So I had experience with other Puerto Rican organizations before Taller Boricua. But in 1992, I showed at it, I remember we were organizing the show at Taller Boricua, and that's when it was on 106th Street. And I met Marcos, I met Fernando, and I remember I had like a mild meltdown of terror, like, how is this gonna work out? And Marcos just straightened me out, like, come on girl, get serious. And I tell people the story, they're like, Marcos has never raised his voice. I said, well, it got tough with me, I don't know. But it was a great experience. It was a one-person show. At that time, the Village Voice was very important, and my image of my work was in the centerfold of the Village Voice for what was called Whack Attack, which was this women's organization. So it was an extraordinary experience, but it was also like a strange experience in a different way. It was like getting to know family that you didn't know you were related to. Fernando was wonderful, Marcos was wonderful. Later on I met Nitsa. I mean, it was just like, people who could love you and put you in your place real quick, which I never minded, because I have to say, for me, the Colombian community, arts community, did not accept me in the same way because I was raised here. And they would always tell me that I didn't speak like a Colombian because, of course, I grew up in the United States, so I had everybody's accent mixed into mine. But also everybody's story mixed into mine because for me, my identity was more as an immigrant, a person who was creating their place. Very different from growing up in your own country where you have your place and people accept you as one of them. It's like, for me, a very common question, especially when I go to residencies, like I just did the U-Cross residency in Wyoming. Most of the people I was with were wonderful, but outside of the artists and creative people immediately like, so what country are you from? This one! And this was one of the first conversations I had with Marcos, where he's like, oh, I know what you mean, it's the same for Puerto Ricans. We go to Puerto Rico, we're not Puerto Rican. We come here, we're not American. But that's exactly how I felt. I felt like I was in this weird in-between place, which I felt gave me an ability to see things clearer. I decided that this was a positive thing. It's just that, a lot of the work that I saw that Marcos was producing, Fernando was producing, Nitsa was producing, and Rafael, all these people were just so cutting edge and just fearless, while everybody else is trying to play nice so they could be, part of the art world. So I felt like being associated with Marcos and Fernando, and then later Nitsa, just made me braver, made me accept well, not accept, but go through moments of disrespect and finding a way back, like being able to talk about myself and my work and its relevance. And, you know, had a great time. I mean, the best parties in the world were there after a show. So I have to thank Marcos, Fernando, and Nitza for the great times that I had and the feeling of being accepted. That was really great. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Esperanza. I would like to mention something because someone sent me an email and that was curious, asking me why I have decided to include a non-Puerto Rican artist and a non-Latin American artist in the exhibition, because there is Stephanie Lee is a Korean artist, and as Esperanza mentioned, he was born in Colombia. And that was a very rude comment, but I had to explain her that the Taller Boricua had, you know, a huge vision about the artwork and about the Latin America and the, you know, their goal to, you know, to be in a space to produce art, to allow to artists to connect each other in different cultures. So my decision to include those artists was founded in the work that you have done during these 54 years, and I believe that is relevant, you know, in opposition of other artists who decided to be more focused in their own cultural trajectories, as the, you know, the white cube. Other, you know, movements in the city, probably they were more interested into think and, you know, into fight with the idea of the white cube. You were linked with the community directly, and that means everyone, for the reason that was important. And the other reason in this exhibition, you know, to have those artists is because sometimes people, you know, could think that, you know, oh yes, something that happened 54 years ago. But no, we have Esperanza Cortez, a contemporary artist, linked with the workshop, and other, you know, youngest artists. I believe that is relevant. It means that we are talking about the past, but from the present, and the people that, you know, they're building the history of the city. You know, they didn't stop 50 years ago. That's relevant. We're still here. Marcos is still here. So we hope that the Taller Boricua is still with us for a long time. So thank you. Thank you, Esperanza. Okay, Jorge. Thank you, Jorge. Jorge Lozano Lorca is an immigrant mixed-race artist and filmmaker born in Colombia. He is the author of the video, The Puerto Rican Obituary of Pedro Pietri, included in the exhibition. Lozano documented the poet in his last years through the streets of New York City. He has been painting and filming and making videos, song performance, and installation work since he went to Canada in 1971. He has made over 170 movies work that live not in between but within cultures. His work is a reflection of his personal commitment to epistemological disobedience and the investigation of different ways of thinking, feeling, and doing to see the world differently, to have a visible presence, and to create new coordination with living and non-living matter. Jorge's fiction, short, and experimental works have been screened at TIFF and Sundance and internationally at many festivals, museums, galleries, and community cultural centers. Since 1991, he has facilitated self-representation video workshops for marginalized Latin and non-Latin youth and art students in Canada, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, and Venezuela. Thank you, Jorge, and welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am really happy and very honored to be here today listening to such a powerful and rich history of the resistance, the cultural and political resistance of Puerto Rican people in the United States, obviously connected to the island as well. I always respected very much Puerto Rican culture, and my history, I don't want to talk about my history because my work has been here in Toronto, where I have done my activism and my artwork as well. But I'm just going to mention a bit, and it's going to be very short, with my encounter with Pedro Pietri here in Toronto. He came in here, I think, around 1997, invited by, I don't remember the names because I wasn't one of the organizers, but I know that he was a Puerto Rican who was at York University, who is very unusual it's very unusual to see Puerto Ricans in Canada, actually. He came to Toronto in perhaps 1998 or 1997, the late 1997, and he actually created a kind of a movement in here in just by one reading one night that was really full of many people, mostly from the Latin community, spoken word artists, really young Latin who were at the time organizing a very strong movement of denunciation of invisibilization and racism in here in the city. So Pedro stayed there a few days, so there was a lot of conversations going around the history of, through Pedro's voice, of the history of Puerto Ricans in New York, unknown to all these youth in here in Toronto, and it really created an effect. And Pedro, in some ways, became kind of a hero here in Toronto, and he has, just as he said in when he spoke to us about that he has come from the death, basically, that he had been forgotten, or he had in time in New York, that he was sick. I don't know what happened, but anyway, he wasn't. He said, "I came back to life," and he began again. He came back to Toronto and stated, I think that 1 week where he wrote a lot of new poems, and I went to New York, and I helped. He asked me to help him to film an installation performance that he was doing in New York. That it was a screen of a woman, a recording of a woman talking, and the performance was in New York. He did it talking to the woman on the screen. It was a play. I can't remember very much the content of it, but at that time I was very friends with Pedro, and we decided to do the Puerto Rican obituary, just to film it. I had a really cheap little camera, a VHS camera, and the idea was just to go through different places in New York that he will remember as important. Doing that, I had the opportunity to know Pedro more and know more about him. For instance, being in his house, I was impressed by the way that he lived in his house. It was a house that it only had black paintings. He had a collection of black paintings, and I don't know what happened to those black paintings, but I mean, it was kind of a work that he's done. While we were recording the poem in New York, we had a lot of conversations on the importance of how poems, they like that poem is still relevant right now. And it was relevant when we made it in 1997, obviously, but it was written in 1973. So I was really curious talking to him about how can we see these poems in the time that they were made, because in 1973, it was a whole different picture. The alphabet, the place where you guys are right now, I think that it was very different then. The alphabet, it was like a war zone full of junkies, people from the Puerto Rican community, and we know what caused that. The CIA influx of drugs in the 60s into Harlem and all those neighborhoods. And I happened to be there at that time, and so we were talking about that, because I think that the roots and the genesis of this poem is basically a very hard. Puerto Ricans were being pushed against displaced constantly. And in the upper side, in the 110, 120, it was also very different as well. That it was another part that inspired the poem. So those conversations were really interesting, and yeah, basically that was my encounter with Pedro. Lasted for about 5 years, and didn't see him anymore. Then I was told that he died, and they asked me to give them a copy in CD. I can't remember whom, because they created a container with a lot of stuff from Petro that they bury somewhere to wait for the future to come and reopen it and see what happens. And but that's basically it. And it is also, when I was listening to you, I was just thinking about how that history that we fight so much to make visible, because it had been made invisible, it's still not that visible, right? And in terms, for instance, with Pedro's plays, like he gave me a book of his plays, which I read. I remember The Living Room, and very absurdist plays, almost like a Ionesco, but with a vision and techniques of Puerto Rican feeling and sense of humor. So unfortunately, I never seen those plays in Latin America. I know that they've done them in New York. I don't know how much, but they're incredible plays, So things that get lost, and I think that this exhibition is really important. We should be doing exhibitions every 10 years to revive, because for us immigrants and for Puerto Ricans, especially in the United States, had to reinvent constantly, to say, hey, we're still here, kind of, in some ways, I think. But that's basically.
No, thank you, Jorge.
Thank you.
I would like to say that the video is already online, and it now is a new document that is available for everybody. Then thank you, Jorge. Okay, Ricky Alberto Colon is a choreographer, actor, and co-founder of Whole Artists Inc., Downtown Whole Festival, former creative director of the Arthur Vega Foundation, an artistic director of Whole Happening Gallery, Whole Haha Gallery, SAG-AFTRA, EAA Film TV, at present directing his own opening play for Miguel Piñero's relationship to his mother. Okay, thank you, welcome.
Thank you. I've got to say that I don't know what the proper word is, but to sit on this panel with you guys, it's really like, I just feel like I should just be saying thank you. So I'll start off by saying that as a young kid, I grew up in El Barrio, Spanish Harlem. I wasn't aware of the Puerto Rican first in my family for a very long time. So my story is that my grandfather immigrated from Puerto Rico in the early 1940s. His grandparents had a farm in Utuado, Puerto Rico, and it was bombed. It was bombed when there was the transaction of Americans coming in, this, that, or whatever. My grandfather moved to Puente with his parents, and they were getting much older. He was having a lot of trouble finding work because he was very much an activist, very much worried about what would happen to Puerto Rican culture, and he was a bit of a troublemaker. Whatever that means, I would hope it's good trouble. At any point, he moved to New York, and he opened up what I found out later may have been the first Puerto Rican-owned jewelry store in Spanish Harlem on 103rd and Lexington, not too far from the train station. And it's a Chinese laundry now, or was a Chinese laundry. But at any point, he would repair watches and sell jewelry. And during the night, he would go off to the factory in New Jersey and make paper cups for Dixie, the Dixie Company. So anyway, my grandfather met a woman in Spanish Harlem at the Marqueta, who was a Native American Indian that was touring the country with the Catholic Church. She was taken from her family to deprogram her from being a Native American, and she traveled with the Catholic Church around the country, and she became a linguist. She became a teacher. When she came to New York in the Marqueta, she saw my grandfather, who couldn't speak English. She could speak Spanish, but she was with the nuns. And she made it a point to come back to the Marqueta again without the nuns, and she introduced herself to my grandfather. And anyway, the story was they fell in love. She ran away from the church, and in the back of that little store on 103rd in Lexington, she raised 6 children. And yeah, and she taught English to Italian kids and the Puerto Rican kids in the backyard. Everyone became her children, and she was known as Doña Teresa. She was ashamed of being a Native American, and she took on the persona of being a Puerto Rican. My grandfather was a Puerto Rican who would not allow anyone to speak Spanish in the house because he was ashamed. He wasn't ashamed when he moved here. I think he was beaten down. The way my aunts and uncles told me that his nickname at work in New Jersey at the paper company was Spick, because he would always say, "I don't speak English." So he was very ashamed of his accent and stuff. Anyway, so I'm the product of a family that was really not interested in identifying who they are or whatever. But I grew up immersed in the Puerto Rican culture in El Barrio. I actually found theater in the streets in Puerto Rico. I found the museums, and your discussion talking about the museums takes me back to a discussion I had with my abuela and my grandmother. When a young kid, we'd go to Fifth Avenue, hit the museums, and I would always be struck by the fact that all the art that I was seeing never looked like me. I never really told the story about me. So I started investigating as I got older about my grandfather, so on and so forth. Anyway, I became an actor, and I met Miguel Piñero one day after filming a movie in Times Square called Times Square with Trini Alvarado. And I left set and went down to the train station, 42nd Street in Times Square, and I saw Miguel Piñero. I knew who he was because I was very interested in what was the flavor at the time. It seemed like Puerto Rican art and stuff was on the street. It wasn't in establishments, it was in the street, or you'd find it. It was like you'd bump into it, and I immersed myself in it. My aunt, Alicia Colon, was the first Puerto Rican artist to have her work exhibited in a World's Fair. And I attached myself to her because I knew I would learn more about the arts. So years later, I became a professional actor and met Miguel Piñero in this neighborhood. I moved to this neighborhood just about 40 years ago, met Miguel Piñero again. I guess you would say he wasn't, his work was very popular, but he was very much a product of what he was involved with in the streets, drugs whatsoever. Anyway, time went on, and I started working on films here on the Lower East Side with Miguel Piñero. Law and Order, many different parts. The only acting parts that were available to a young kid like me was I would get hired to come to the Lower East Side to mug somebody. You know, it was always that type of a negative image. But I was very attached to Miguel Piñero. I actually think as a young boy I had a crush on his swag. I don't know. There was something about him, just this swag. But he was always very protective of me. So anyway, I'm moving fast, so coming back to modern times now, I was there when Miguel Piñero's ashes were scattered on the Lower East Side. And I remember how it really impacted me, you know, to see him have that tribute was a beautiful thing. So I had this personal story, this feeling about Miguel Piñero for a long time. And a few years ago, I bumped into a young Puerto Rican kid in the neighborhood who he was interested in poetry, and I was able to introduce him to the Bowery Poetry Club, so on and so forth. And one day I spoke to him about Miguel Piñero, and he replied to me. He said, "Oh, that was the junkie that was a poet." And I immediately was stunned by the narrative, like what hit him first, and like, where did you learn that? So it intrigued me to go ahead and write a story, and I started writing a play about a conversation I had with Miguel Piñero on the steps of Charas. as a young teenager, and I was thinking of running away from my home, my mom, and Miguel had a very serious talk with me about the struggles of young Puerto Rican mothers that were single parents and the sacrifices they would make. And it made me really look at my relationship with my mom. And Miguel told me some things about his mother. So I started writing a play called That's My Son, Miguel Piñero. And it was based on the pride that Miguel Piñero's mom had in what her son had done with words. She was always very good with words. She was known for her ability to put letters together and words together, and she took credit for that gift that he had. So with that I say that I feel that what I'd like to say here is that I think what's very attractive now is Latinos, of all Latinos coming together and lifting the history of Puerto Ricans and the art movement and the jewel of being a Boricua. You know, I was saying to someone that my mother used to say that an accent is the jewelry of language. And I repeated to that someone today because, you know, my mother, it helped my mother that she used to remember what her father had gone through, always being called spick and not liking his accent. So I'm very intrigued with this presentation here today, with this panel, and with what I hope is going to be a resurgence of Latino and Puerto Rican artists stepping up. And when I look at the walls in here, I remember as a young boy the art and the prints and the you know, the printers and everything, the people that I would see. Political art was what I was exposed to first as a kid. And then with Miguel Piñero and with the poetry. And then Bielio Puretri, I'm sorry for my New Yorkian, it's very bad. Anyway, he was my next door neighbor as a young adult in Manhattan Plaza. He was my neighbor. So I was always being hit with this reattachment to my culture. And now as a young adult, traveling to Puerto Rico and returning to Puerto Rico with my husband, and I have property there now. I am very intrigued with writing about my grandfather's experience, why he left Puerto Rico, what happened when he came here, and what would have happened if we went back. So I'm very intrigued and working on a film screenplay right now. That's it. That's all I have to say. It's been a bit of something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. You know, sharing this powerful story is, you know, I'm very moved. And I would like to say, when you mentioned that idea of your mother,
yes,
about the accent, that reminds me, you know, because I learned English reading, yes, reading alone. Then, you know, a while ago, someone started to load about my pronunciation, yes, and I say, "You can understand me?" Yes, I can understand. That person says, "Y si te hablo en español, puedes entender?" And he stayed quiet, and I said, "Who's smart here, my dear? You or me?" You know, this is a thing. But you know, I thought about that when I was designing the exhibition, and when when Marcos showed me the documents, you know, at the beginning, because I thought about the Tito's story and Eduardo Cruz. You know, the police killed Tito. You yes, know, they captured him one day, and 2 hours later, you know. And my decision was, I'm not gonna victimize the victims. You know, right, I'm gonna put in the surface the art and the great thing that they have been done during yes, all this time. Then I'm not gonna hide the terrible things. No, everything is in here. But at the same time, this is something that had changed my path during the process of this exhibition, is how you can reinvent, how you yourself, how can you change your answers to the bad things, because they always answer with art. You know, they kill a person, they create a gallery.
Yes.
They are violent, then they create a workshop. And on that way, art is a weapon to,
Yes.
you know, to change the context, the social context. So that's relevant. Okay. We have the last key of our puzzle today is Stephen. Thank you so much to be here today. Stephen is an advocacy journalist, architecture critic, urbanist, and project organizer based in New York City. A graduate of Michigan State University at New School for Social Research with a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary humanities and a master in liberal studies. He founded Flint Public Art Project and served as a president of Amplifier Inc., a non-governmental organization that employs emerging ideas, media design, and aesthetic strategies to advance alternative political and economic framework and institutional transformation. He has published in the New York Times, Village Voice, Art in America, Dual Architectural Review, Oculus, Landscape Architecture Magazine, Architectural Record, and among many others. So thank you, because Stephen is with us today to put the artistic and historical context of the New York City, of the period of the Taller Boricua started to work in the city. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks. First, thank you for bringing out this incredible history, making it present. The opportunity to learn about these kind of giants living among us. That it's just an incredible thing to kind of have and to expose and bring out. So, and to Juan as well for hosting. For me, I came to the opening of this show and got to meet Marcos, which was, just like a moment of discovery and recognition, because having researched this period for about 10 years, working on a book that's still in process, I recognized that Taller Boricua was a part of the Art Workers Coalition, but I knew nothing about that, involvement. So, I got to ask him, how did you end up involved in this moment? I mean, and so you mentioned that you were at SVA, but you didn't mention it. I think to me, you had been in classes with Hans Hoppe, who was also teaching there, right? Hans Hoppe?
Oh, yeah.
Well, in any case, what my understanding of this prehistory was that this artist Takis, as you were saying, was protesting his art being involved in this show, the work of art in Age of Mechanical Reproduction or something like that. It was sort of a kinetic art show. And Hans Hoppe also had a piece in the show that was not being handled properly. It was like this, before he became an institutional critique person, he was doing these kind of like kinetic sculptures, and it was supposed to kind of freeze and it would melt it because they were unplugging it at the end of the night. So that was initially why this claim was made by the artist that we have a right in relation to our art. And it seems to me that this was, a beginning of an explosion of the idea. We can make claims on institutions, and we can form new institutions because of our, these claims, these demands that formed around this coming together of a group of artists, all with individual, and community interests, to make a list of 10, how many demands were there? It was like 19,
Yeah.
It was a
13.
large number, 13 demands.
It was 13, and I always remember that because the Young Lords also had 13 demands.
Yes,
And I always
they did.
said it. I wonder if really, they, the art workers were kind of copying
Yeah.
the young lords, because I've seen exhibitions where they had young lords posters up. You know, like when they would do the group exhibitions, the Art Workers Coalition, they definitely had. They had Black Panther posters up there too.
It was an influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, just to bring out some of the themes that were discussed. That just the notion that this was a moment when all these institutions formed, you know, Taller Boricua, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the El Barrio, Museo del Barrio, and many more.
Cobra, what's another institution? African American artist, Cobra.
Yeah. So, and to me, the story is about belonging and power. Actually, like who has the power to speak, to be recognized, and to be included in the formation of policy about neighborhoods where we live, my research ends up going back to maybe 10, 20 years before this, when some of the key power brokers of the coming era were essentially planning the city. They were bankers, they were heads of corporations, and did they think that it mattered to talk to somebody in the Puerto Rican community about what the plan would be for the Lower East Side, when they designated it as a slum and to be cleared and redeveloped as middle class housing and a highway thoroughfare and this sort of thing. So the other thing that I was recalling as I was thinking of this moment was there were bombings by Puerto Rican nationalists during this period. I think in 1969, in fact, that were arguing for Puerto Rican independence. This goes to questions of colonialism that are incredibly salient at the moment, that have to do with who has control over nations in fact, and so I mean I think I'm not necessarily a big nationalist. I think I like the idea that the sense of belonging of the U.S. in principle, according to a Nuyorican notion, should extend to all the people here and all the people who want to be here, really. But that said, I sort of hear your tears as an expression of this sense of a recognition of belonging, of having a place, of ultimately having power over the space of our lives in the city. So I mean that's a brief sort of way that I think about this. I also mentioned the other person that I was aware of who stood out to me as kind of an outlier during the formation of the Art Workers Coalition was Rafael Ortiz, who I was curious about and ended up researching and interviewing him, because I was like, oh, there was a Puerto Rican artist who was visible at this time, who was fairly famous and had was really affiliated with this kind of Fluxus generation of conceptual artists. Doing his most famous piece was the Destruction in Art symposium piece of the piano destruction. What was it called? He still does it sometimes. Just the basically taking a chainsaw to a piano.
Sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Original.
Yeah. So he's also still around, living in New Jersey, and just, you know, founders of institutions, kings. I don't like that term, king, because I don't like monarchies, but heroes of the West. So anyway, thanks for.
Can I ask a question, Stephen? I came here about 50 years ago on June 10th to Tompkins Square. And I remember south of the Delancey, right?
Yes.
Was beginning to be torn out, right? It was a Puerto Rican enclave
Yeah.
of citizens, Puerto Rico living there. And throughout the years, I came and went to Boston, etc., to school. The parking lots south of the Delancey remain as parking lots. And I used to say, what the hell? Why don't they develop this? Then I did some research, and the Puerto Ricans had the right of return, but it will expire in 50 years. Now you see, what you were saying before, Essex crossings, right?
We should have Alan Moore and company talk about this.
Alan, can you add something to that?
Because of course, I mean, the only thing that I've actually published about this whole tranche of research was about their project to basically, as an insurrectionary act, claim a piece of city-owned real estate and turn it into an art space on Delancey Street that was part of this urban renewal area, right? I love the story that Tom Otterness was like the lookout when they went and broke the lock of this city-owned building with
Gangsta.
you know, and Alan and Peter Monig, who's now back in Germany. But I don't know if you want to add anything to the story, but he's also art historian. So.
Could you add something to that?
If you like.
Well, you know, we're kind of inspired by Jocks, because we thought they had occupied the building like the Italians.
Yeah.
But I think they got a contract like instantly. And we actually got a contract instantly. Well, within a couple months, we had another place. The city like invited us to dialogue and, hey, what do you want? Well, gee whiz, we would like a space. You know, because what happened was when we were open for a very short period of time, hours, you know, during that time, a tenant organizer from some of the apartment buildings that were being evicted for this clearance that Stephen was speaking about came into our space and said, man, we'd like to have meetings here. Really dangerous. So get those guys out of there, give them a space, stop this stuff. And of course we took it. Take what you can get.
Yes.
You know, I should mention that this exhibition is part of a program that we started with Juan, named New York Art Escapes, and is dedicated to putting the surface other cultural process that has been occurred here in New York. But at the same time, the idea is not only to talk in an aesthetic way, it's to talk about the social connection with the context, with historical context that brought us at this moment when the real estate, you know, is destroying basically the life of everybody in the city. And I don't know, someone said a few days ago, a New Yorker artist, she said that probably in 15 years, New York will be like these cities in the middle of the country, you know, without people like New Yorkers, artists, you know. What is going to happen? I believe that you have been talking about the governance of the community, you know, on the city. And I believe that the problem is, you know, going further, that the art work, you know, it's about the live people, and it's something that I try to put it in the context of this exhibition. Is you know, how in a moment when the artists probably were more interested in galleries. I know that is a thing that we need probably, but they started to work in a school with people. Now for us that's very familiar because we are talking about social justice, you know, workshops and etc. But 15 years ago, say the artists wanted, you know, to make a display at the entrance of a school, that was like, you know, what are you doing? You know, that's not art. We need white walls in a museum, in a place to show art, and that's relevant, you know. This is something that happened after the cultural studies, you know, in 90s. They started to do that at the beginning of the 70s. That's something relevant. That was a new path at that moment, you know. We have been working for a while, but I don't know if it's someone to comment, you know, something or a question, or maybe Jorge, Esperanza, or yes, please.
I think the two items that are directly correlated to the Art Workers Coalition and to Taller, one of which is when school decentralization started, and in the Lower East Side, the UFT and the Jewish Defense League and the senior citizens, the retired teachers group in the housing projects, rose up to try and crush the decentralization movement. Now, the Art Workers Coalition, the artists in the neighborhood, we all banded together, and I was running an educational program in a building, I don't think exists anymore, between 6th Street, between B and C, and there's teachers and parents boycotting the school. They came to my place. Now, it was incredible. We had just the sense that the artists were so involved in this whole process. The sense that the parents were involved. Teachers who cared were involved. And what was very clear was the blatant racism of the UFT, what was going to happen to the schools, the decentralization, and how unsafe the neighborhoods are going to be, especially where the retired teachers were. And they were able, so that was one issue. The other one I think is very important that Marcos is involved in, and it was a real important, it was an important moment in organizing the Puerto Rican Latino artists. That was the CEDAR Artist Program that ran from the 78 to about 82. And there was the General CEDAR Program for New York City, then there was one for managed by the Association of Hispanic Arts. All of the artists I've worked with and the organizations I've worked with came out of that, from Marcos Dimas, from Zaba Rolón, from Manny Vega, but it brought everybody together. You had Intor Theater there, you had Pepitorio there, so it brought this wonderful coalition of artists and as a way of funding arts organizations, and many of which exist to this day.
The other thing I think is extraordinary, as a little, you know, among these extraordinary stories, all of them, was the notion that you had someone like Patrick Ireland, who worked for the New York State Council on the Arts, you know, was a conceptual artist himself, but had a double identity as an administrator, create this workshop program that then funded, you know, all of these new emerging alternative galleries and spaces. So
He worked for the NEA. His program is national.
NEA.
It's national. And those was inspired by activities in New York.
Yeah.
Brian.
Well, I wanted to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brian, yes.
I just wanted to make a remark as an artist. I've lived in the Lower East Side since I was very young. That's where I moved to when I realized that the way I wanted to live wasn't going to work in a more conservative area. And as I said, I was a young mother, but then I got into teaching early because of Maya. And I didn't become a teaching artists on purpose. It just kind of happened, you know, that someone was not able to make it. They asked me to work, and then I was told, wow, you are really good at this. And so I taught for a very, very long time. And I feel like so much of how we view social practice was created by a lot of artists who were looking for ways to use their work as a positive energy in the culture. I mean, I was aware of the fact that there were a lot of things that I felt were missing from my daughter's own education, that of course I as an artist would bring into her school, but then I was everywhere. And at the time that I started showing at Taller Boricua, I taught a great deal in El Barrio, and most of my children were Puerto Rican. You know, it's just this awareness that we're all part of the same family. This other, what we're countering is when everybody is separated into silos, you know, which was part of the colonial idea. Everyone gets separated as if we're all like different fruits. No peaches, good apples. And so, it's the interesting thing, and I'm sure that Marcos could talk about it, that when you work with people who are really young and then go back to your work, it affects your work. I mean, my work is completely affected by everything I ever did with children and then teenagers and then elders. It all, you know, it's all a circular thing, but this way of working was begun by a lot of people who felt it was just not enough to show in galleries. You know, that was not enough. And then, of course, other people pick it up as a way of getting attention. But I don't think it was the original reason that a lot of people did this, was not to get attention, but to actually feel that your work is a positive energy in the world, that your work is a way that helps people connect, and especially that helps children find their place in society.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Very well said. Thank you.
Any comment or question? Jorge, would you like to say anything? Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Today is our last day. This is the closing day, so that has been a very, very deeply processed during the whole month. We have had different people coming, and I can remember especially John May, who come. He's a student history, and he was interested in revolution and art. He's a New Rican student, and he was ashamed because he doesn't speak Spanish. And I said, no, it's okay, that's not a problem. And when he finished it, the tour for the exhibition, he said, oh my God, I barely can breathe. I'm so excited. It's like I found a door that I can open as a New Rican. So, very emotional exhibition, including for me. So thank you, and including this round table. Thank you everybody, Stephen, Marco, thank you so much, Ricky. Yasim, thank you, Esperanza, Jorge, thank you, Juan, and thanks everybody.
And now we're going to close the evening with a very famous Bud Light, the things you shoot at when you don't feel good. For free. Thank you. This ends the transmission of Whitebox.